pornography link contributes to sex trafficking, whether you realize it or not, whether you were going out to meet someone or not. The women who participate in pornography, most of them are there against their will, or they don't want to be there. And it's not like they're being caged up, but they're being forced because they have no other option.
Well, welcome to the True Man Podcast. Now, I'm beginning to talk more and more about the power of asking for help. For me, that derives itself from not asking for help when I needed it. And to take that a step further, I would say this. I'm not even sure I was asking God for help as much as I was demanding He step in and intervene in some of the things that were going on in my life at certain points. But what I know is this. That is not a very hopeful or optimistic place to be in. So what can we do to live a more authentic, hope-filled life and come out from behind the mask that we sometimes wear? Well, let's learn more about that and how we can live a better life with today's guest, Neil Getzlow. Now, Neil is an author, a podcaster, and you can check out his book in a book called Unmasked, Conquering Sexual Sin and Walking in Victory. Neil, welcome to the True Man Podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. I truly appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Well, absolutely. You know, it's boy, if people knew what went on before these podcasts start, we just had a great conversation about Cardinals baseball and everything else under the sun. But Neil, I love what you're doing. And on your homepage website, it says on your website, it's never too late to turn your life around. I believe that as well. So talk about your story, the story of your life and turning your life around. It's a real life comeback story here, folks.
Yeah. And there's like, and please feel free to stop me and like back me up, because there's so many different paths and twists and turns we could go down. Yeah. So, well, my story starts way back when I was 10 years old, and it involves pornography, and that's where I first got hooked on pornography as a 10-year-old. And as I mentioned to you when we were talking earlier, I grew up as a latchkey kid of the 80s, so no internet, no nothing like that. There was a little forest, wooded out area behind my elementary school. I used to ride bikes down there with the other kids, and in this little area, there was these ripped up pages of Playboy and Penthouse magazines all over, and that's kind of where we first got exposed to porn, and fill up on that. And not, at 10 years old, you're not really sure what you're looking at, but I knew, looking back on it now, and this is one of the things that I've had to learn is the pornography addiction that I had, the addiction to sex that I had, was the symptom of something that was going on, that had happened in my life, or that something from my past that was triggering it.
Yeah.
For me, and this is something I figured out after all this came out, was that I had to learn how to be alone as a little kid. My parents got divorced, so I went and lived with my mom. She had to get a job then, working 40 hours a week. So now there's a lot of time where I'm alone. I had siblings, but they were all much older. In fact, by the time I was 10 years old, they were already out of the house. So I had to spend a lot of time alone. And when they got divorced, I moved to a new school where I knew nobody.
Yeah.
Moved to an apartment complex where there were no kids around. And then on either side of my mom's bed in her apartment, there are these two nightstands with giant stacks of Playboy and Penthouse magazines on them. Now, what am I going to do as a 10, 11, 12-year-old kid? I've got nothing else going on. I started to look at those magazines.
Yeah.
I had this hole in my heart. I couldn't figure out how to fill it. So I started filling it up with pornography, and it started rewiring my brain.
Yeah.
And thinking,
which is precisely what it does. And I'm glad you put it that way, because I don't think a lot of people have that understanding that, pornography There's no better way to say it. It just totally rewires your brain and puts thoughts in there. The devil slides in there and puts thoughts in there that don't need to be there.
Yeah.
And
And
isolation, I mean, once you're in isolation, then things really get sideways.
well, and that's, and that's why I think men today, there's so many men, right? Even men inside the church that struggle with pornography. And I talk to a lot of these men and they're lonely. And you think, well, how can men who are married be alone? And I was that guy. And it's a self-induced loneliness because we're not talking. I mean, we have a perfectly good partner who wants to communicate with us, who wants to talk to us. And yet for me, I kept this mask on, hid everything behind it, never let my emotions out, never talked to her about anything of consequence. I just kept everything bottled in. So I became lonely in my own prison that I created myself. And that pornography was the outlet of all this loneliness. And because when I talk about rewiring my brain, like that was the thing. Like I didn't know really what love was. I didn't have affection from my family like that I thought I had wanted or needed. And so that pornography soon, that's what I thought love was. I started to equate love and sex. And it jumbled my brain starting at 10 years old. By the time I got to high school, my relationships and trying to meet girls would be about sex because I just thought it wasn't the need to be sexually satisfied. It was more of the need to be wanted and to be, the affection, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so,
you were acting out of what you were reading and seeing.
yeah. And it wasn't reality.
Well, it's not reality. And, I get asked about masculinity quite a bit. And the reality is, and of course, toxic masculinity always comes up when that happens. But, I would dare say that is a side of toxic masculinity. I'm not saying you were toxic. What I'm saying is that, it's these false pictures, these false representations, and they take over our brain and they become toxic, and we act in a way that we might not ordinarily act if we had learned it a different way. Fair to say?
Absolutely fair to say. And I would say, again, it wasn't necessarily intentionally me.
Yeah.
I was not intentionally going out to be toxic. But as I look back on it now, I would probably say it was mentally abusive to these women that I was meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. It was coercive, and it was just after one thing and one thing only. And it just, I know I hurt a lot of people along the way over this, people I cared about a lot, hurt myself.
Yeah.
And, it all stems from this shame that we have for looking at this stuff. Because again, I had no relationship with God at all growing up. I grew up Jewish, but it was culturally Jewish.
Yeah.
So I had no relationship with God. I was in it for the jokes and in it for the food is what I would like to say. In fact, the only time I had a connection with God was around Easter time. My mom would watch the 10 Commandments when it came on TV. We'd sit down and watch that for about 3 hours. And that was it. Like that was the only God time I ever had.
No kosher ham or anything.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, right. And so I have this shame cycle, and I deep down, right?
Yeah.
God does write the laws on our heart, whether we know it or not. They are there. I knew looking at pornography was wrong, even though I couldn't tell you why necessarily at the time. So I'd go and watch pornography. It'd fill my heart, make me feel good for, a little bit. Then when I got done, I'd instantly feel that shame. And I'd be like, well, this is why nobody loves me. This is why I'm alone. And then I'd have to go look at pornography again to get out of that. And it's just a vicious cycle that spun over and over again and would manifest itself in many different ways throughout my adult life. Pornography was where it started, but just like any drug, soon it wasn't strong enough to satisfy, to fill up that hole in my heart. And when I had access to more time and more money, it led me to bigger and more, riskier activities, which included ultimately looking on the internet to meet women to pay for sex.
Yeah.
And then that addiction spun out of control they ruined one marriage, almost ruined a second marriage. I did it so my wife who now knows about this, we'll get to kind of that unmasking here in a little bit. We've been married 12 years now. And, for the better part of the first 8 years of our marriage, I was meeting women on business trips, or wherever, meeting women online to pay for sex.
What were you feeling? I mean, I'm sure you're going through this. Like, I know this isn't right, but I can't stop myself. And it very much is a drug, isn't it?
It is. There was nothing you could, like, I wanted to stop it. Again, I knew what I was doing was wrong, but in the moment, that's where the rewiring takes over, and that dopamine, like I would get more. For me, it was more about setting up those appointments and going through the different things you had to do to meet up with someone. That's where the rush came from. The act itself, take it or leave it, quite honestly. It was all those things that led up to it, that rush, that energy that you got, that feeling, right? Like you would imagine like taking a drug, right? You get that
robbing a bank, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get that rush of adrenaline, and even though you knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop it. And it's almost like your brain just goes on autopilot, and it just takes over. And it's just, my body was just along for the ride. But again, once these encounters would be over, I'd be walking back to the car, and instantly my mind would be like, what did I just do?
Why did I do it?
Why am I doing this? Why can't I stop doing this? I promise I make it home and my wife doesn't find out, I'll never do it again. And then a week later, here we are doing it again, having the same exact conversation. And again, this is this shame cycle. And because of this self-induced loneliness, it was a mess. Like I was in a mess and I needed help.
Yeah.
I needed something to help me, or someone.
Let me ask you this. Did you, at that point, as you're going through this, did you have Christ in your life? And the reason I asked that was you basically said, you're kind of looking up going, if you can help me and I won't do this. Did you have Christ in your life at that point?
No. When I'm saying I need, like, it was basically, I was leaning on my own wisdom, my own, knowledge.
Trying to get it out. Yeah.
Right. Trying to get, it's more and more of like a pep talk to myself. Hey, I can do this. Like I can be strong. I'm not going to do this. And of course I wasn't. I would say that even though I grew up Jewish and knew about the Jewish faith, I was considered myself an atheist for most of my adult life, to be quite honest.
So how did you make the transition from sort of Jewish to atheist?
Right.
My God.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still not sure how I know how it happened. It's still hard to believe the way it happened. But so all these things that I'd been doing ultimately led me to a hotel room on a business trip in Chicago in February of 2020. And woke up early one morning on the last day of the trip before my business meetings and went to go meet someone. Again, I'm not sure why I even had this urge to do it. I was just lonely and bored, and that's just what I did when those things, and anxious about things. So when that ever happened, that was my go-to drug. Set up this appointment, went to go meet this woman. As I was getting ready to leave her hotel room, there was a second bedroom and that door opens up, and out comes this 6'4", 300-pound man, looked like a Chicago Bear offensive lineman. And in his hand, he's holding his cell phone, and on it, I can see it has my wife, Amy. It has her contact information on it. He says, "You're going to pay us more money, or we're going to tell Amy what you've been doing."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that was like the first time I've put myself in so many situations that looking back on it now, it's like, I can't believe I did that. But this is probably the first time where I'm thinking, okay, this might be the end of everything right here if I don't get out of this room. And, I'm kind of like, putting my shoes on and trying to get out of the room. Meanwhile, I'm Venmoing these people money after money, and they're saying, no, we need more. We need more. By the time I got into the elevator, I paid them about $900.
Oh,
which actually I probably feel pretty fortunate. That's all it was. But as the elevator's opening and I'm jumping in, I can hear the door open up behind me, and they're like, hey, you're going to have to pay us more money or we're going to call your wife. Well, I got out of the hotel room, and this is where I equate my story to wearing a mask. Went about my day, put on my mask, tightened it up, had great business meetings, had a great day in Chicago. Nobody knew I had just been blackmailed by a prostitute. Nobody knew what the internal turmoil I was going through. And frankly, I'm so good at stuffing it down. I didn't even think it was an issue. I just kind of laughed it off saying, all right, they're not going to call Amy. This is fine. And Amy actually picked me up from the airport that night. She didn't know they hadn't called her yet. So I'm thinking, this is great. I'm out a few $100. I can deal with it. I'm moving on. And then 3 days later, this is Sunday, March 1st, 2020, exactly 9:30 p.m. My cell phone blows up. I'm working in my office. It's this couple again. They're texting me and they're saying, hey, you've got 15 minutes to pay us more money or we're going to call your wife. And I just ignored him. I was like, whatever, like they're not going to call. They probably have 100 people they're doing this to, and they're just seeing who's going to pay money.
Right.
But 15 minutes later, I hear Amy's phone ringing upstairs, and soon enough she's coming charging down the stairs, and I can still hear her footsteps as it grows louder coming in my office. And she bursts into the office and she's like, are you cheating on me? And of course my first reaction any good addict would do is I lied. Like, this is the first time I'd ever done anything like this. I never want to do it again. I'm so sorry. But I was more sorry that I was caught than I was sorry for the hurt that I was obviously causing her.
Yeah.
And so that set off this wild 6 weeks of struggle. And think about the timing of this too. I get this March 2020, 2 weeks later, COVID enters the picture.
Yeah.
Our jobs are both impacted. Now here we are stuck at home trying to figure out what our marriage is going to look like if we have a marriage worth saving. So finally, this would have been April 13th, 2020. My addictions did not go away during COVID. I still met up with women back home in Kansas City. Somehow, this is the second time God visited me with a 2x4. I went to go meet a woman in Kansas City on the April 13th. Amy doesn't know how to use my computer. I locked my computer.
Yeah.
I went to go meet her. My computer somehow was not locked. Amy somehow figured out how to get the messages off there. She's starting to text me what I'm sending this other woman. So I turn around, come home. I don't even remember what I told her. It was a bunch of junk, a bunch of lies. And she looked at me and she said, Neil, there's only one way that you're going to save this marriage. She's like, you need to ask God for help. Because she gotten saved. She found Jesus 3 months after we had gotten married. So she's been praying for me for 8 years to get saved, not knowing I was doing all of this while she was saved, and I'm out here, being, the biggest sinner in the world.
Yeah.
So I went to bed that night, woke up the next morning. She had left the house, didn't tell me. Obviously she's upset. So this was the first time in my life I prayed, and I just asked God for help. I said, I don't know what you can do, but I have nowhere else to turn. Like this is it. I'm losing my life. If there's help out there, if you're real, give me a sign that you're out there. And as soon as I finished the prayer, the garage door pops open and it was Amy. And Amy is the key to all this. And essentially I sat down Amy that day, and this was April 14th, 2020. And I confessed everything to her. I took my mask off for the first time in my life and told her what I'd been doing.
How did that feel?
It was incredible. It was like, I know this is kind of weird to say, but it was awesome. Like, this 40-year weight had
Yeah.
been lifted off my shoulders. I hadn't told anybody. I felt lighter than I had ever felt before. But then I'm looking at Amy and I'm thinking, I just totally ruined her life. Like, what is she going to, how is she going to handle this? And what she said, she changed our lives. She said, Neil, Jesus forgave me for my sins. How can I not forgive you for yours? I forgive you. And that was it for me. That was the last day I looked at pornography, April 14th, 2020. Our marriage has changed. My life has changed in ways that I could never dream. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I mean, I started reading the Bible for the first time, and like, God does give you a new heart. He took out this heart of stone. He took it out. He put in this heart of flesh, and I am a new creation. Like, this is we were just talking about this last week. There is, like, you can see the line drawn where version 1.0 of Neil died and version 2.0 of Neil carried on. There's no mistaking it.
What I love about that is, like, we all have these like little moments in time, and like, you're giving us dates along the way. And I can kind of relate to that because we have a COVID story in our house too. Like, when my wife came home on June 15th of 2020.
Yeah, right.
And her job was eliminated.
Yeah.
Funny how these little COVID things. And, but how does the fact that you can pinpoint this,
yes.
How does it make you feel to look back and go, God loves me? I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but like, God loves me so much that he gave me the ability to release this.
I feel it's almost impossible to put into words. On one hand, he did give me an incredible freedom that I could never do on my own. I tried to do on my own for 40 years. I could never do it. And he broke it like that in an instant. At the same time, it's also, it's hard too, because I see men that struggle with this inside the church. Amy and I had a chance to share our testimony in front of our church one weekend last September. And the number of men that came to me afterwards saying, I'm struggling with this. I don't know what to do. It's heartbreaking to hear that. And to me, that's the hard part, because, and it's almost like I almost feel guilty in a way. Like, it's like, because none of us deserve this gift that God has given us, yet God's bestowed this gift on me. And now these men who know Christ, like, they can't get out of it. And sometimes I'm at a loss for words, because it's, again, people who've grown up with Jesus now have been infiltrated by this poison. It's hard to see the version 1.0 versus version 2.0 of these guys. And that's where, having conversations with them to help realign the relationship with Christ and get their lives back focused around God, and having that relationship with God is so important. But
you really have an interesting perspective of it, because you didn't have that intimate relationship with God, and he showed up. I mean, there's such a demarcation point here, as opposed to the guys that, are going to church. I like to describe this too as Christianity's I always relate everything to sports, right?
I like it.
Christianity is a full contact sport. Okay. It is action oriented. In other words, just because somebody's sitting in a pew doesn't mean they're hearing or feeling what's going on, or even have that intimate relationship with Christ. I know, because I felt like I was a good Christian all my life. I would say that I was probably more performance driven thinking that was going to take care of everything, but not necessarily having that intimate relationship with Christ. And I think so many, I'm going to say people, not just guys, take up a pew and think that, all right, I'm going to pray for forgiveness, and all of a sudden this magic pixie dust is going to come down and everything's going to be hunky dory. But the reality is there are a lot of people sitting in church pews that are wounded and trying to figure how to get out of the pain that they're in, whatever that it is.
Yeah. And you've got, and I love the sports analogy, and I'm glad you brought up sports, because the way I look at it, like sports was my religion before I found Jesus. Like I had a relationship with the St. Louis Cardinals that was spiritual and transcendent of everything. My life.
That's perfectly understandable.
Yes. My life revolved around how my sports teams did. If they had a good weekend series, man, my life was good. If they're losing on a losing streak, it sucked. I wouldn't read the newspapers or turn on social media to see how they were doing.
Neil, and I'm right there with you. It's always good to talk with a fellow Cardinal fan for sure. But here's yet another concern that I have, and I know, to me, this is it's another addiction, and we've talked about this on the podcast. I had my good friend Dallas Buck on. Refer back to that podcast episode where we talked about gambling and his gambling addiction. One of my biggest concerns right now is, in fact, and I'm going to get this wrong, but I know that ESPN is some big gambling deal. I'm highly concerned personally about the accessibility to gambling. It has the same symptoms as looking at pornography. To be honest with you, it has a lot of the same outcomes because it's going to pull you away. I am really concerned at the gambling trend I see. Now, a lot of people go, well, Mike, people are gambling undercover before. Now it's just legal in a lot of ways. I'm not sure that making it mainstream makes it right. And I'm worried because I see more and more people getting caught up in this, thinking, oh, well, if I win a lot of money, or they become a professional gambler, it'll change my life. No, it won't. It'll take you down a dark hole.
Well, yeah. And, in fact, I was just on social media this morning. Phil Mickelson is blowing up on there because there's I don't know if it's a book or an article someone just wrote about him. He's gambled over like $1 million or something ridiculous over the past few years. And of course, the responses to this were like, well, he's a hero, right? Like he's being lifted up. Like how cool is it that he's able to do all this? And it's anything that I think, look, and this is the hard lesson I had to learn. I think about all the money that I wasted over the, what I did. But now that I know that's God's money. Like he gave us all these resources. He gave us all this to be good stewards of it and to use it for good, not to just burn it. And it's
a perfect example is bringing up Phil Mickelson. Now, I've always liked and appreciated Phil Mickelson as a golfer until some of this whole LIV golf stuff has come up. Now that's a whole other discussion that I won't get into right now. But the point of it is yes, I've heard that he gambled a lot of money away. John Daly, another golfer, has the same gambling stories, and then John had other challenges with Jack Daniels as well. But when you're making that kind of money, rather than gambling it away, what kind of good could you be doing in your community? Now, and that's what I would say about that situation.
Well, and he probably is doing good. I'm sure he's doing a lot of good with what he's doing. He's got so much money, he doesn't know what to do with it. But and maybe these guys aren't the best examples because they do have fake money, like it's monopoly money. A lot of it, But for you and I, and to our resources are, I think, a little bit more precious. And I think when we do think, whether it's sports and being addicted to actually watching the games, and that leads to wanting to bet on these games, whether it's pornography, which for me led from watching it to actually engaging in sexual deviancy with other people. Like all of these things start innocent enough, and it takes you away from God. And that's what the enemy wants to do. I'm going to distract you.
Yes.
Social media, don't matter what, anything that takes your, and I will say right now, I am a huge offender of this on social media. I scroll way too much that I'm sure when I have to account for my time, it's not going to be very pretty, because I've wasted a lot of it. Like anything that takes you away from, but that's the thing too. Like when these distractions take you away from hearing God's voice and what he wants to do in your life and what his purpose that he has for you. And I think we are called to a higher purpose, to be kingdom men, to be kingdom husbands. And in order to do that, we have to deny ourselves these simple pleasures of being able to pick up your phone and scroll on social media or watch a football game. Yeah, those are great comforts, but do you want a life of comfort or do you want a life of faith? And I've been asking myself that question. My pastors challenged us with that question, and I've been asking that myself, having a conversation with God a lot lately about what life am I choosing, the life of comfort or the life of faith? I want the life of faith. Now, do I have the courage to actually go out and do it?
Oh,
I don't know.
love that. Well, listen, I love that because, when you have an addiction to anything, right? Every day, again, I don't mean to speak for you, but a question will roll out of this eventually.
Yeah.
You have to have the courage to start over again every morning. Like yesterday didn't even happen. So how do you find the courage to keep going every day when I'm sure there's an urge there?
It's funny.
I bring this up because I want to hear you talk about it, because I think this is such an important, we have urges, right? And
we do.
And
we absolutely do. And again, and I want to make it very clear too, that, Amy's forgiveness of my transgressions and sins against her and against God, that did not absolve me of any accountability and responsibility of what I've done and try to make it right. And so you've got to, okay, so look at it this way. When you want to lose weight, what do? You stop eating potato chips, you stop eating cake, you stop eating junk food, you cut all of it out, then you go exercise and you get yourself active and you do good things, and eventually you'll start losing weight.
Yeah.
What do you do when you have to get your mind right? And we don't talk about it like this, but you've got to cut out the junk food of your mind. And so I legitimately, and I know this is going to sound crazy, again, especially 4 years ago, I would really think, Neil, you have lost your mind. But I got rid of cable TV. I got rid of YouTube TV. So for the first time in 40 years, I'm without ESPN in my house. And I thought I was going to miss it. I do not. Believe me, I do not miss it 1 second of it. We got rid of Netflix. We got rid of Hulu. We just eliminated all that junk food of your mind. Again, social media is kind of like my sweet tooth. I need to do a little bit more pruning right there. But you have to eliminate that stuff and then go replace it with the good stuff for your mind. For me, it was filling up on reading the Bible every day, getting into the Word, going to church every week, not just going to church and attending, but actually giving your heart to it and being part of a community, being part of a small group, and meeting other brothers and sisters in Christ and filling up on that. We have so much going on that is connected to God in our lives, whether it's going to church, going to a small group, serving, Bible study, whatever. I don't have time for those distractions.
I love what you just said, because my question to you was actually going to be, how are you filling the void?
Yeah.
And you walked right into it. And I do think that your answer is so incredibly important, because I feel like we've given so much credibility to sports, to cable television, to social media, to all these other things. And I'm guilty too. So I'm not pointing fingers here,
Yeah.
but we've given so much credibility to these other things that we don't stop to think necessarily that this is, I hate to say this, but that God should be that priority, and that putting good thoughts into our mind, and it doesn't necessarily have to be reading the Bible all the time. It could be reading a good book.
I want to be, so the way I look at it, like watching sports, it's not a bad thing, right? Like I still watch sports with my son. That's how we bonded over baseball growing up, right? And with the Cardinals, and we talked about in the 80s with the Cubs and that's how we bonded with other men at times. So in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but we can overdo it. And I know I absolutely overdid it, and that led to anger, that led to other addictions. Today, I challenge men, be as fanatical about Jesus as you are about your favorite football team.
Yeah.
Right? Why is it so weird for, to go to church and be, if you're just standing there with your hands in your pockets and you're listening to the worship music and you're like, okay, well, and doing your time, might as well stay home. Like be in, like I'm telling, and I never would have been this way, but I got my hands raised and I'm singing to God. Because that's what, if you look in the Bible, that's what Paul says to Timothy. Have your arms up to God, singing it without any anger and controversy.
We should celebrate our faith, and I'm not knocking anything. There are some beautiful old hymns out there that have been around for years, but I gotta say, that doesn't really stoke my fire very much. Because some of them are so monotone, and I look at these things sometimes and I'm like, guys, we should be celebrating what we're talking about. I saw Willie Roberson recently, and he's got a great little speech. He talks about being a Jesus guy. You got to be a Jesus guy, and he's got an old buddy. And actually, we're pretty fortunate when I saw him speak this time. He's got a good friend, and they call him the Jesus guy. This is where it comes from, because he runs around even at church shouting out, Jesus. And so Willie's telling this story at this men's church thing that I was at, Passion City Church, actually, here in Atlanta, very sizable church. And so Willie's telling this story about his buddy, and all of a sudden you hear, I don't even know how many guys are there. It's a huge auditorium, right? All of a sudden, from out of nowhere, you hear this guy shout, Jesus. But
That's awesome.
But isn't that awesome? I mean, to me, the enthusiasm of that, and it was really funny. It was such a great story, that Willie would enter this conversation around being a Jesus guy. And the people that I know that know Willie, I've informed them to ask him if it's okay and appropriate for me to steal that speech and that line, because I love it so much that we need to be Jesus guys. It doesn't mean that our life needs to stop, but it may mean that we need to eliminate some of the negative things that we're doing to ourselves and our minds.
And I think the other thing too something that I'm working really hard on is being more generous with my thoughts. Ooh. Meaning I can go, like in my day job, I can go work from 8 to 5 and think nothing about what's in front of me on my laptop, and how I'm going to get my work done. And the next thing, especially when I work remote a lot of the time, so I'm at home, I can go from 8 to 5, nothing but the computer. And I get done with the day, I'm thinking, what was I just thinking about that whole day? Me. How am I going to get my work done? How is this impacting my life? Me. It's all about me, instead of, it should be. And again, you need to focus on work, right? But there are moments of the day where I can definitely be more intentional and making sure that I'm putting generous thoughts out there, whether it's praying about something or someone, reaching out to God for a break, or just having your heart positioned in the right way, so that it's not about us. It's It's about what Christ has done through us.
And that whole word generous makes me think of the grace, that God gives us. And sometimes, I've said to some people, hey, you need to have grace. Give yourself a little grace in that. And I've had people say to me, Mike, you need to give yourself a little grace. Sometimes we need to be reminded of that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And that's where having good people around us really comes into play. And I think what's important about the conversation we're having today is it's hard to put good people and have good people around you when you're wearing a mask, when you're being fake, when you're not real, when you're being a poser, all these words that we attach to it. You can't have intimate relationships with the people around you, or for Christ, for that matter, if you're posing and not being real. And so I love the fact that, you have had this, you've had God come into your life, and this epiphany has occurred, and that you're able to work with people and help them get through what is, these addictions are terribly difficult to live with.
Yeah, they are. And, the other thing that goes along with it, especially for my addiction, which is an area now I'm starting to lean into even more on pornography and prostitution, is sex trafficking. And I know that's a big hot topic now because of the Sound of Freedom movie. And, but that movie only gives you that much of a glance into what's really happening, especially in the US. It's not about the van cruising down your neighborhoods, yanking kids and women off the streets. It's happening online. And that's
and
the
it
thing.
Starts with pornography.
That's right, 100%. Yeah. And that's the thing that I think that hurts the most, is that looking back on it, the women that I've seen, nobody ever came out and said, I'm being trafficked. But they don't have to. They're not going to, because they know if they don't make their quota or whatever, they're going to get, whatever's going to happen to them by whoever's controlling them.
Well, it comes with its own set of shame. Right?
Yeah.
And we have, and I'll put this in the show notes, I've done 2 episodes on sex trafficking. And I'll tell you, it was not a topic that I knew a whole lot about. I've learned about it. And, because we have, some of the politics we have right now, we have wide open borders and things like this going on. It's much worse than it ever has been. And us men need to take responsibility in that. We are the Johns of the world that go out and do this stuff. And so we need to take responsibility for it.
Right. We are the ones creating the demand.
Yeah.
And so you're right. It starts with pornography. And I'll share this too. Like, clicking on that pornography link contributes to sex trafficking, whether you realize it or not, whether you were going out to meet someone or not. The women who participate in pornography, most of them are there against their will, or they don't want to be there. And it's not like they're being caged up, but they're being forced because they have no other option. They don't have any, right? And it's a much bigger conversation. It's a huge, that this country needs to address, the world needs to address.
Yes.
Why do women feel like their only option is to sell their bodies to other men? Why do they get into that? Why isn't there nothing else? It's a huge socioeconomic discussion that I'm not smart enough to understand.
We can do a whole other podcast on that.
Sure. But we contribute. Men contribute to it, and that's part of my mission going forward, is to help educate men. Like, pornography contributes to it, but we have a responsibility to help pull other men away from it, especially when we have the influence that we carry as Christian men in our faith. That we've got to be there on the front lines, because we know a lot of our brothers there are stuck in it. Yeah,
so true. Neil, as we begin to wrap up today, what a great conversation. Tell everybody how they can get a hold of you, how they can get a hold of the book. We'll, of course, put this in the show notes, but tell everybody how they can get a hold of you and learn about what you're doing.
Sure. If you go to neilgetzlow.com, you can learn more about me. You can email me through there. You can find my podcast, also called Unmasked. you can find it there and then learn more about my book, Unmasked, Conquering Sexual Sin and Walking in Victory. In fact, we used to be donating a portion of sales, but we're just, at this point, we're donating all of our sales to an organization called Run to Stop It, which is an organization out of Kansas City that is funding anti-sex trafficking organizations across the U.S. There's some really good organizations doing some important work to reduce the demand and to help pull victims out of that industry. And so we're just very blessed and humbled to be able to contribute in a small way to that.
Well, Neil, that is awesome. And I just want to say, I appreciate you coming on the True Man podcast. I appreciate you being vulnerable. And I'm my heart sings that you were able to find Christ and that you are able to serve in the way that you're able to serve and help people that are struggling with some of the very things that you went through. So I appreciate you coming on today and telling your story.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks, Neil.